Previous videos we have been looking at steps 1 all the way to step 10, and so far we've added some markup, as you can see here, and we've also added some styles to the body as well. Yeah, so let's continue building our HTML form. So next up, for step 11, what we want to do is we want to after the P element, insert a form with an action attribute targeting this. Okay, so in HTML we have what we call the form element. Okay, that is what we use to create forms. So we add our opening form tag like so, and a closing form tag like this. Now, so this is the element that we'll be building our form in. So we want to add an action attribute, and the value of that action attribute is going to be this URL here. What this action attribute does is to tell the browser where to send the data that the user will be giving us, right? So for every form, for example, any form that you see on the internet, you are asking your users to give you some sort of data. Okay, when you collect that data, you want to submit the data somewhere, maybe to a database somewhere, and that way you would be able to keep the data that your user gives you. So that's what the action attribute does. It shows us where we want to submit or send that data that we are collecting. All right. Now the method attributes specifies how to send form data to the URL in the action attribute. The form data can be sent via GET request as URL parameters with a method get like so, a method attribute to the value of get, or via a post request as data in the request body with a method with a method attribute to the value of post. Okay, so what we want to do is to set a method attribute. So the way we are going to do that is stay method. Okay, and the value that we are going to give this method attribute is post. Okay, so something is wrong here. No, maybe this shouldn't be capital, so let's not capitalize it. All right. All right, so for step 13, as the form will have 3 distinct sessions, we want to add 3 field set elements within the form element. Okay, so as you can see here, we have this first session. We also have this second session here, and then we have this final session. So these are the various sessions that we're going to have in our form, and we have an element called fieldset that we can use to do this extension in our form. So we add fieldset like so. Sorry. And then we're just going to repeat it 3 times. So just copy and paste it like so. Okay, so now as you can see, we have this little borders, indicating that we have some sort of sections in our form. Yeah, don't worry about the borders, we'll work on the styles later. Okay, so the first field set is going to hold name, email, and password fields. As you can see, name, email, and then password. So let's start building out that first field set. So we want to add 4 label elements to it. So we have our first label element like so. And then let me just copy and paste it. So we want 4 of them. All right. Next up, we want to add the following text to the label element. So the first one is going to be enter your first name. Okay, second one will be enter your last name. Third, enter your email. And then finally, we want to create a new password. All right, but as you can see, they are not arranged one on top of the other, but they are arranged one next to the other. That's because these are inline elements as opposed to block elements. So in HTML, we have block elements and we have inline elements. Block elements are arranged such that one is stacked on top of the other, and inline elements are arranged such that one is positioned next to the other. But then we can change that default styling or display, that default display with CSS. Okay, so now let's see this unit in CSS called rem, and it stands for root em. So we have em, which is also another unit of measure in CSS, and we have rem, and rem stands for root em, and it is relative to the font size of the HTML element. Okay, so as label elements are inline by default, like I said earlier, they are all displayed side by side on the same line, making their text hard to read. To make them appear on separate lines, we want to add a display of block to the label element and add a margin of 0.5 rem and 0 to separate them from each other. All right, so let's do that and I'll explain what is happening. So first off, we want to add styles to the label element. So the way we do that is to write label, bring our curly braces, and then the first style we want to add is the display. So we want to change it from inline to block. Okay, so it's inline by default, but I want to make it block. All right, now as you can see, it's stacking one on top of the other. Okay, next up, we want to give it some margin, and the margin is going to be 0.5 rem and then 0. Okay, so what this means is that for margin top and down, we want to add 0.5 rem, but then for margin left and right, we want to add 0. Okay, so that's what this means. So if you write margin, then you give it just two values. The first value is applied to margin top and margin bottom, and then the second value is applied to margin left and margin right. So that's how it works. If you give it just one value, then it's going to be applied to all four sides. That's margin top, margin bottom, margin left, and margin right. But once again, if you just give it a value, two values rather, then the first value is applied to margin top and margin bottom, and then the second value is applied to margin left and margin right. All right. Now we want to start working on the input. So we've already added the labels. Okay, so each of these inputs has their label. So we want to start working on the actual inputs themselves. All right, so the way we want to do that is to nest an input element within each label. Be sure to add each input after the label text and include a space after the colon. So there's the colon, we want to include a space, and then want to add an input element like so. Okay, and want to do the same thing for all of the labels. All right, okay, so as you can see, the input element is also a self-closing element. Okay. All right. Follow accessibility best practice. Link the input element and label element together using the 4 attributes. All right. So we want to give so following accessibility best practice, link the input element and the label element together using the 4 attributes. Use the first name, last name, email, and new password as value for the respective ID attributes. Okay, so we want to give each label element a 4 attributes. Okay, and the way we're going to do that is to do this. Okay, so if you're on Mac, the way you can do this is to click here. Okay, if you want to, what I want to do now is to type at different places, at the same time. So I click the first place like so, and then I hold Option. So Option on Mac. If you're on Windows, hold Alt. So like so. Okay, that way I don't have to type it 4 times. So I'll just say 4 and like so. All right, so I'll do the same for the first one is going to be what? First name, last name, email, new password. Okay, let's come here and then want to give it ID attributes. So the ID should be the same as the ID of the input should be the same as the 4 attributes of the label. So first name, let me stretch this to the right so that we get more space to work with. First name, we'll say last name. Let's do email. Then let's do new password. Okay. All right, next up, we want to specify the type attribute of a form element because that is important for the browser to know what kind of data it should expect. If the type is not specified, the browser will default to text. Okay, so for example, we have here enter email. You can just say and it will be sent even though there's not a valid email, and that's because we've not declared or defined the type of input this should be. But if we should define its type as email, then it would flag this as invalid, okay, because this is not a valid email. All right, so the way we do that is to use the type attribute. Okay, so for the first 2 input elements, we want to give it the type attribute of text. Okay, so we'll say type text, and then for the email, we want to give it a type of email. Okay, for the third one, so type attribute, and we'll say email. All right, so the email type only allows emails with the @ symbol and then the period in the domain. Okay, then the password type also obscures the inputs. All right, and if the site does not use HTTPS. So let's see, for example, type, and we'll say password, right? So in this case, as you can see, I don't know why my email is showing up here. as you can see, if you begin to type, it doesn't show you the text you are typing. That's because it has a type of password, and by default it knows that it should obscure the text that you are typing. All right, so on to the next one. Okay, so for step 20, the first input element with the type of submit is automatically set to submit its nearest parent form element. All right, to handle form submission, after the last field set element, add an input element with the type attribute set to submit and the value attribute set to submit as well. All right, so as you can see, our form has a submit button here. So after the user is done filling the form, we want the user to click submit so that we actually submit the data that the user give us. So to do that, we come to this last field set here. Okay, and below it, we want to add our submit element like so. And sorry, instead of a submit element, you want to add an input. Yeah, it should be an input element. Okay, like so. And this input element should have a type attributes set to submit. Okay, as you can see, this our button shows up here, and then we want it to also have a value of submit as well. Okay, now this value, the value is the text that appears. So for example, if I just write send, okay, you see send instead of submit. All right, so let's change it back to submit. All right, so yeah, we are now done with step 20. So we'll end it here for this video, and then we'll continue in the next one from steps 21 all the way to steps 30. Okay, so see you in the next one.